In the darkest worlds that ever were, the only thing that brings light are stories. Those stories are kept in one place, the tiny bookcase.
Hello, explorers of the Sacred Library.
Hello,
I'm Ben.
and I'm Nico, and you are listening to the Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to Season 2, everyone.
Welcome one, welcome all. We are very excited to introduce our first guest of the season.
Very smooth.
Thank you.
We're joined today by someone described by the Scrolls as a social worker, lecturer, and science fiction author. He is a winner of the prestigious Arthur C. Clarke Award for his novel Dark Eden and has been writing science fiction short stories since 1990. We would like to welcome Chris Beckett.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, pleasure to be with you. Look forward
Excellent.
to talking to you.
How's your lockdown been?
Well, I don't think it's so, because I'm not a lecturer anymore. I'm just a full-time writer these days, and so basically frowsting at home is my natural habitat, really. So it's not as bad for me as it is for some people. I haven't got to look after small children, and I haven't got to worry about losing my income and all these kind of things. So it hasn't been too bad, really. But yeah, it's getting a bit boring at this point. But
Does it not cut into your sort of normal writer time of wistfully looking across a moor and?
well, I think I'm still allowed to wistfully look out across the odd moor, or at any rate, the odd field or something. Anyway, you know, but
Only once a
So,
day.
yeah,
though.
there is a fair, yeah, it's true, but you can wistfully, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, my right, what I like to call my writing life consists of an awful lot of staring wistfully into space. You're absolutely right. But I find I can do that. I find I can do that at home quite well. But so it hasn't been too bad. But you know, like everyone, I should be glad to see the end of it.
yeah, it's been a hell of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be glad to see. I'll be able to see my kids again and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's some tough stuff.
Mm.
We're fortunately we're both locked up with people, but we do know people that have been on their own this whole time, and it's that's a bastard.
right.
That's not good.
That is really hard. Yeah. No, I've got my wife here with me, and so yeah, we're not on our own, and you know, we seem to get along all right. You know, so yeah, that's worked all right.
Well, that's
yeah.
always good, isn't it?
That way, that would be even worse than being on your own, with it being stuck with someone you really, you know, maybe someone you were just about to split up with or something.
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
Or you know, or you're someone you've secretly been planning, you know, and then suddenly you find you're with them.
Been planning your escape for months, and then the lockdown, the shutters come down over the doors.
Yeah. I just say some relationships have been saved by the lockdown. People have been forced to talk things over, and you know,
almost certainly. Yeah.
And others have probably, you know, relationships have foundered for the same reason. So yeah, but yeah, I haven't minded too much about it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, on to some happier stuff. We've got some stories. I'm very excited to hear Chris's, but we're actually gonna. I think I'm going first, aren't I, Nick?
You are. I've decided that you will take the fall.
What's the prompt?
Our prompt this episode is I'm alone.
Vito tilted his head back and allowed the dripping sensation to slide through his sinuses. He was running dangerously low on the sniff, but that was okay. It really was. He was confident he could jump to 80s Columbia and hit up Don Pablo for another kilo. That man had seemed to like him after all. Everyone did. The jailbroken leaper was putting in a sterling performance. It was true that he was starting to feel the cold, though. The wolf fur long coat he wore was coated in icy crystals. He'd stripped the garment from Hugh Glass, as the old trapper had slept off the tequila Vito had brought with him from 17th century Guadalajara. That old boy had been a real tall talker when drunk. Across the small ice float, the edges of which were slick with melt, the last polar bear scrabbled for purchase. The raggedy-assed beast was causing the small float to buck Bronco style, and Vito laughed as he was bounced up in the air. As he landed, he slipped and slid towards the panicking bear. He roared with the fun of it as his boots thudded into the side of the cadaverous white-furred face. The weight of it stunned the bear, and its claws screeched from the slick ice as it collapsed and fell beneath the small waves. "Oh shit!" giggled Vito, laying back on the last of the polar ice and looking up at the swirling green of the aurora overhead. As his laughter subsided, Vito reached inside the fur coat and brought out the leaper. Its orange lanyard, which looped around his neck, hung slack as he pondered the display. The charge level was still strong. In fact, it seemed as though he'd barely used any, despite days of leaping. He eyed the reset button, which would return him to normality. Vito scoffed at that and began to think of where and when to go next. On these kind of benders, it always does to manage your surroundings like you manage your fuel. Some moments in time can be a real downer, after all. He found himself thinking back to what he'd already seen and began mentally flicking through possible destinations like he was slumped in front of a streaming service inside his apartment. He'd already done the hits. His jailbroken leaper had been able to take him to all of the moments which are normally locked behind an academic wall. Al-Azaria had been first, of course. There's nothing quite like Passover in Bethany in the first 30s. The mountain of olives peaking high under a low sun, the luscious greens smeared in terraces over the hard, ruddy cream of the earth. Beautiful. The man from Nazareth had loved the sniff. The two of them had watched that sunset and then fucked. The Magdalene woman had joined in, of course. Thinking back to it now, the Nazarene's oral technique had felt a little toothy, but Vito didn't hold that against him. It was quite possible that being the son of God and a good cocksucker were mutually exclusive skill sets. A 1900-year leap later had taken him to a very different 30s in the Weimar. Long rectangular flags draped from tall golden frames moved but a little in the wind of the day. Their bright red background with its stark black on white sigil brought on a bout of deep-rooted fear in Vito. Another bump of Pablo's finest saw him making his way to the front. The angry racist had been at it in a hard and fast sort of way at the top of some small steps. His shouting was translated for Vito, courtesy of the leaper's sphere of influence, into some nonsense about victory. Vito had spied Reifenstahl working her 35mm camera and realized the potential for some havoc. He'd quickly tapped in a date and a place that he knew he'd enjoy next and looked back over at the propaganda filmmaker. The twin film drums had stuck up above her craned neck like Mickey's ears. Vito had crashed into her at a run, smashing the camera to the floor. He had heard a satisfying crack and the jingle of ruined mechanisms from within the contraption. The wails and yells of the enraged nearby National Socialists nearly gave Vito an erection. He saw the commotion had attracted the attention of the newly minted Chancellor. The man's tiny mustache quivered with rage at being interrupted mid-flow. Vito had given the man a coquettish wink and slapped the leaper that hung about his neck before burly soldiers could apprehend him. Later, he'd ridden with Temujin to the Wuxia fortress of the Great Wall. He'd watched as the captured prisoners from earlier battles were driven forwards by the Mongols in a Karash attack. Those prisoners, more fearful of Temujin than the prospect of death, were struck down in droves by the Jin defenders, leaving the Mongols behind them untouched as the fortifications were breached. The tall smudges of smoke on the sky were underlit by the great burning wall as Vito rode through the shattered gates directly behind Temujin. Untouchable in the orgy of death because of the leaper around his neck, Vito began to feel that the event was somehow hollow. He took a moment in the madness around him to take a piss against the broken fortress wall. Jesus Christ! Pain leapt up through his cock as he urinated, and he gritted his teeth against the agony of the first century clap. 13th century China had been a bit of a bust overall, he felt. Yet Temujin's savagery and obvious talent at destruction made it clear how he had earned the name of Genghis and the title of Khan. Vito's next destination had been on his must-see list, March 44 BC, Rome. Donning the robes of a senator, Vito had used the sphere of influence exuded by the leaper to smuggle a gladius inside the theatre of Pompeii. Once within, he looked over to the man that sat upon a throne where no throne should have existed. With a face dominated by a large nose and stern brow, Gaius Julius Caesar frowned at the men around him. As the elderly senators drew their concealed daggers and began their tentative attack, Vito strode into the fray. He swung the gladius around him wildly and split the brows of the noble assassins. Vito yelled exuberantly, protected as he was by the leaper, and one by one cut the senators down. The frown upon the dictator's face had been replaced with confusion and relief. Vito laughed to see it before leaping. Leap after leap, place after place, time after time. Vito worked through the moments that shaped humanity before landing on the last fragment of polar ice, closer to his own time. He twiddled with the lanyard before typing in the coordinates for his next leap. Though warmer than the polar ice, the north of England in the 8th century wasn't much more hospitable. Vito stood upon the sand and rocks of the broad beach and watched the waves bring unwelcome visitors for the first time. Behind him, the priory's bells tolled a warning that meant nothing to him. Vito pulled the wolf fur coat tight around him to ward against the savage North Sea winds and heard the keel of the longships crunch up the beach. Large men dropped from their strakes and shouted to each other. A moment of confusion swept through Vito. The leaper normally translated anything he could hear as it passed through its sphere of influence. He retrieved it from around his neck and looked at it. On the small display screen, he could now see that the device had gone from nearly full charge to critical depletion. "Jailbreaking shysters," muttered Vito. He looked up into the bearded face of a Viking. The man's hand was battle-fast as it tore the device from Vito's fingers. No, he yelped. The Viking replied by sweeping the flat of his axe across Vito. The force of it broke his jaw and sent him into momentary oblivion. Vito awoke to a rocking sensation. Stripped of his fine coat and other belongings, he could feel that he was on a ship, and his face was a burning beacon of pain. He could see from where he lay that someone had bound his hands, but he forced himself to roll over and look about himself. The Vikings were gathered about their loot in the belly of the longship. A large pile of gold and jewels pulled from the priests of the island was at their feet, and the bilge water swept back and forth over it. Their attention, however, was on the small bag that had up until recently been in Vito's pocket. Their beards were white as they munched the powder into a gloopy mash and swallowed. Some were already feeling the effects, and from their screams as they dangled over the sides of the ship, he could hear that they were talking to their gods. One Viking, the one who'd broken Vito, was puzzling over the leaper. Vito tried to scream at him not to touch it, but a fountain of pain geysered in his head. The man shook the device confusedly before thumping it against the side of the ship. Then he simply vanished. The other Vikings roared their appreciation of the trick and bellowed for Valhalla. Later, much later, the people of the town the Vikings had sold him to as a thrall tried to communicate with him. Some tried for years before giving up. They eventually named him Alun. Even after his jaw healed, he could not understand them and found himself unable to learn much more than the simple commands directed at him. Vito did not know where he was, but he knew when he was, and that weighed on him every day. He would weep himself to sleep as the come down from the sniff and his situation became a reality. Every night his cries would boil down to the same phrase, repeated. I'm alone. I'm alone. I'm all alone.
Extremely cool. I have an immediate question about the lore of this story.
Okay.
So you were talking about how like a lot of the stuff the leapers could be used for was educational, but then not everything was. So what was the intended normal use for a leaper?
So it was more that the technology existed and had restrictions placed upon it.
Okay.
So there are certain bits of history, like important moments that have been identified through, I guess, academic means that were only kind of accessible to people that had the correct clearance or were studying that period or that kind of thing. That was the sort of idea behind that.
Okay. In that case, it's doubly cool because I really liked the idea that technology had been created for good. It's not a very common thread in these kind of stories. It's normally military and stuff. So I really liked the idea that it was meant to be for good, and that this prick had ruined it essentially.
Well, if it's prevented Julius Caesar from being assassinated, I think it'd have quite major long-term consequences, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that might possibly.
I don't know what would happen exactly, because maybe it wouldn't be that much different, because he was followed by a bunch of other ambitious generals, so maybe it wouldn't make much difference. But
quite possibly, yeah. I think it might have changed the order of the emperors somewhat. I think he probably would have eventually named himself Imperator.
Yes.
because I think he was dictator for life, wasn't he? That was his sort of final title.
He was never actually emperor, was he? Though lots of
No,
other emperors named themselves Caesar after him, but he wasn't himself an emperor.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think his nephew Augustus, Octavian, who became Augustus Caesar, was the first emperor of Rome.
Anyway, pretty rash behaviour to stop Julius Caesar being assassinated, and yeah, that's
Stop Caesar from getting killed, but then do little more than ruin one of Hitler's press conferences.
Yeah,
That was it. It's completely screwed up one angle.
I quite
yeah. He could have assassinated Hitler, couldn't he? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I included that bit because a lot of like time travel stuff that you see, it's always like, oh, the first thing is always, wouldn't you go back and kill Hitler? You know, would you kill Hitler as a baby and all that kind of thing. So I kind of wanted him to be more of an
Not
agent
do
of
it.
chaos. Yeah, more of an agent of chaos, really, than actually
Yes.
trying to achieve a goal.
Yeah, I'll be
Yes.
honest, Ben. I don't often hear when people are, talking hypothetical time travel. Would you go back and have a three-way with Jesus and Mary Magdalene?
Yeah, yeah. People have been burned at the stake for less than that. Ben, you know, yeah.
Well, I will. That is the highest compliment I've ever received. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely take that one.
He's angling for it. He's a witch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it was. I approached it from a perspective of trying to have as much fun as possible with the time travel concept, whilst doing hopefully a few new things.
yeah.
I feel like I probably could have written a few thousand more words, really, just sort of going into the different bits and pieces and seeing, perhaps sort of piecing it together a little bit. But I particularly wanted to get to Vikings doing cocaine.
Yes, I thought that was very funny. Yeah, yeah. And also when the Viking hit the thing on the side of the boat and promptly disappeared, I thought that was good as well.
Well,
Yeah, no, that's very
I'm
good.
glad I made
Yeah,
everyone laugh.
yeah. But yeah, it's rather long on the regret, the whole thing, though, wasn't it, for the poor guy?
I'm going to hope that you've written something with a little more class, Chris. I just don't want the whole first episode of this season to be.
It's well, my thing isn't really. It's kind of. It's just what I came up with. It's not really a science fiction story as such. It's just a kind of weird thing. But
That's perfectly fine.
yeah,
We're not limited to genre or
yeah,
anything
yeah.
like that. That's fine.
So it's just what I came up with. What do you want me to do it now? Or are we?
Yeah,
we-
let's
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Love to hear. it.
Okay. I'm afraid of my own heart. I always have been. I'm afraid that if I ever allowed my heart to speak, it would say words I couldn't bear to hear. Clearly, therefore, my heart must remain silent. I can't actually destroy it, of course, not unless I wish to destroy myself. So what I've done instead is confine it underground in a windowless cell with walls a metre thick and armed guards outside the door. Thus freed from the possibility of hearing whatever dreadful thing it is my heart wants to say, I move around my own spacious rooms with, or so I like to imagine, the assurance of a king who knows that any threat to his throne has been efficiently neutralized by his army, his police force, and his spies. I embark on projects to keep me occupied, exercise my talents such as they are, and amuse myself with various diversions. But I'm never entirely able to forget that somewhere beneath my feet my heart still sits, doing whatever hearts do when they have no way of acting on the world, and thinking whatever hearts think. It preys on my mind, to be perfectly honest, and sometimes I must admit, it might be when I'm out on the terrace looking out over the gardens that I'm planting with box hedges to create a complex and ingenious labyrinth, or perhaps when I'm strolling the well-lit galleries where I've laid out my collections of fossils, dead birds, and relics of antiquity. Sometimes, I can't deny it, I find myself wondering what it is my heart would say to me if I permitted it to speak. This is, of course, a foolish and dangerous line of thought, and I try to set it aside as soon as I notice it. But if I'm to be truthful, I do still return to it rather often. And yes, occasionally, in moments of weakness, I give up the fight, go down to the basement, and make my way along the dimly lit corridor that leads to the place of my heart's confinement. But if you're thinking I'm about to admit to secret meetings with my dangerous captive, I'm afraid I must disappoint you. I may be weak, but I'm not a fool. No, before each of my visits, I arrange for my heart to be escorted in chains to another place, so that when I reach its underground cell, the door stands open and there's no one and nothing inside. I close the door behind me and sit there on my own, trying to imagine what it's like for my heart to be confined there, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. I can only guess at that, of course. In fact, I only want to guess. I certainly don't want to really know. And yet tantalizing clues are all around me in the form of the marks and inscriptions with which my heart always covers the walls. These I study with great care, transcribing them as accurately as I can into a large notebook with a marbled cover, which, after perhaps an hour, when I can no longer bear the feeling of being a prisoner myself, I take back up to the sunlit rooms above, ordering the guards to scrub clean the walls of the cell and then return the prisoner. As my heart is being led back to its normal place of confinement, I sit at my accustomed desk in the middle of my library and, completely surrounded by the world's great works of literature, philosophy, and science, all of them devoted to the unraveling of human experience, I open my notebook to pore over the shapes and words that I so carefully copied down. What is my heart trying to represent, I ask myself? These images of solitary figures standing on mountain tops or drifting through the space between the stars? What is the real meaning of these little fragments about empty city streets, or moonlit rose gardens, or solitary swimmers striking out at night from beaches in deserted coves? These endless references to someone or something longed for, but always out of reach. I suppose you're thinking that the meaning is obvious. The heart constructs a labyrinth of detail and ornamentation in order to distract itself, at least a little. But buried at the center of it all, and not exactly difficult to make out, there's a powerful message that's so simple it could almost be called a cry or a howl. It could be expressed in 3 syllables, which, if I felt so inclined, I could scream aloud right now, seated at my desk in my library, surrounded by all my books. But of course, at this point, I see the trap I'm walking into, so I snap the notebook firmly shut, replace it in the drawer where I keep it, and lock it away. I don't run from the library, however tempting that might be. But I walk as quickly as dignity permits, and when I emerge among the statues and columns of the main hallway, I head for the stairs, wishing to take myself as far away as possible from the locked cell that lies buried beneath my feet. And yet, even as I stride, 2 at a time, up those handsome marble stairs, past the paintings of cut flowers and dead hares and long-gone ancestors, I know there's only so far I can go. There are just 2 floors, after all, between the hallway and the roof. And after that, well, I can, of course, go out onto the roof itself and stand at the parapet. There'll be nothing above me but empty space and the white, unreachable moon.
What a wonderful story.
See, we can't have real writers on, Ben, because now we just look bad. That was beautiful.
It was really fab.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you.
I think it worked, especially with the way that you delivered it as well, very sort of softly spoken, and it just it really struck a chord.
There was a wonderful little turn of phrase in there where you were talking about sitting in the library surrounded by the greatest works of, art and science, and it still being focused on what their heart was maybe trying to say, and it felt so very real in that you can surround yourself with what should be the most important and influential bits of information and history you can, but you can't drown out that little inner voice, and I don't know, something about that really got me.
And in fact, most of it is dedicated to unraveling the human experience, I think was the next line, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think the idea was that the character was always ostensibly trying to understand, but in fact refusing to come to the obvious conclusion all the time. So that was the idea of all the books. But yeah, thank you. I'm glad you liked it anyway.
I did like it a lot. I think we opened the podcast talking about wistfully looking out of windows when writing,
There you go. Wistful looking at it.
There was some of that in there, wasn't there? But also, it sounded quite a bit like the process of writing, perhaps, like trying to figure out what's the story and how it looks and where it's going, and
I guess so. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a sort of like I've been writing recently, and we're talking to you, so maybe I'm overthinking that one a little bit.
He's projecting.
I might be projecting.
No, I'm sure there is something about that. Yeah, because I sat down thinking, oh, well, what have I committed myself to? I said I agreed to write a story called I'm Alone, and I'm not terribly. Generally speaking, I find it quite hard just to start writing something from cold. So I'm sure there was a bit of that. Yeah, I'm sure there's a bit of me sort of writing about my own experiences. A lot of people write about blank page. You find yourself writing about blank pages and things like that, don't you? And as you try and write, I wrote. In fact, I wrote a whole trilogy really, which started with me staring at. I used to have one of those Amstrad computers, with the green letters on a black screen. And I came up with this idea of a world with no sun and luminous trees, and I'm sure that was because I was looking at this black screen with glowing letters, and you just start writing about what's in front of you, and gradually it suddenly turns into something. It became an entire world,
So I remember reading the short story that you later expanded into the trilogy.
That's right. Yes, it would have been the short story I was writing on that screen.
Yeah.
On that green screen. Yeah, that's right. So,
which is in your anthology called the Turing Test, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
It's a very good story. I would fully recommend. Well, pretty much everything you've written, I think. But like the Turing Test is where I started with the stuff.
Oh right. Okay. Yeah. Yes. I used to. I mean, I obviously started out like most people, mainly writing short stories, and that was like a collection of most of the stories I'd written up to that point. Yeah.
Is there an angle of I'm always looking for like different ways to interpret stories and stuff. So is there an angle for your story for I'm Alone that the heart, like the term the heart was actually a this is a far more like sort of base and physical way to express it, I think, but was someone that they cared about deeply. Like I sort of imagined it as like somebody locking their daughter or something, their child or something
the
up.
Same thought of daughter.
Yeah,
at first, and then I thought, no, it's not that. I'm being too literal.
Literal,
that's the word. Sorry.
Well, I wasn't visualizing it as a daughter or anything like that, but people can. I mean, I suppose I wouldn't want to kind of overanalyze. It just came out that way, But I suppose, I suppose it was no, it was the somehow the individual has managed to separate themselves from their own heart. That was my idea. How that was done exactly, I sort of left for the reader to work out, or to imagine,
I really love the bit of description about having them the sort of double take on like the reader assuming that you're going to talk to your heart, but in fact you've had it. I think the line was led away by chains, like in chains by guards.
I had it taken away from this cell, so you wouldn't actually. Yeah, that's right. So I think the idea was this sort of when I don't know if you've ever got a feeling that a place in your head you long to go, but at the same time you really don't want to go. It's that kind of feeling. So that constant being pulled two ways. So it goes to the cell where the heart was, but makes sure the heart's been removed from the cell.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Should we see what Nico's entry is?
Should have gone first.
He'll make sure that he goes first next time, just to
just to be sure.
Just to be sure.
Have you ever been cold? Properly cold. Not shivering because the heating's off. Not a walk home from the pub without your coat, but actual blistering cold. The sort that eats its way through your muscles and scores marks into your bones. The kind of cold that no amount of hot baths and woolen clothing can take away. Yeah, I thought I'd been cold too. 14 years I'd been climbing. I've been to places where you have to piss fast, unless you want it to fire back up your urethra and split your cock like old firewood. I've seen men lose fingers because their hands had slipped out of their sleeping bags in a restless fit and laid against a hard rock that the canvas couldn't save them from. But this... oh, this cold is different to anything I've ever felt before. Climbing Everest alone is a big deal, but it's possible. I certainly wouldn't have been the first to attempt it, and I've no doubt I won't be the last. Regardless, it's a personal goal, and when I set those, I achieve them. If they cost you friends, makes you enemies, or damn near kills you, you have to believe in your goals and push until you reach them. I pushed too hard. I know that now. Still seems a real fucker. I wish I could have thrown something over myself in the night. Feeling my beard get heavy as each of my breaths settled onto it as frost. It made it feel like drowning. But now, as the sun comes up, I know I'm probably just fucked.
The spot of bother there,
A voice. Up here. Clear English, definitely southern. I need to make sure they know where I am. I'm here. My voice sounds like it belongs to someone else. I sound like my mum did. Before the cancer took her. Like every breath is being taken in a tug of war with the Reaper. I miss her. Not like missing a friend. More like if someone took your eyes away. Some integral part of you that you can live without is gone. So there you are. Just existing. Just waiting, I suppose, until you shuffle off this more coil and join them. I hear the crunch of footsteps as the snow compacts near my head. But he doesn't move into my field of view.
Crikey. Not a walk away at that, I'm afraid.
His voice is chipper, and it irks me. He must be able to see what sort of pain I'm in.
Yes, gosh. Completely stuck.
I hadn't dared do it yet. But I look down and I see what he sees. The snow around me is pink for a surprising distance. Like I'm laying on a massive marshmallow. My left foot is pointed skyward. I can see an inch or so of the flesh where my trousers have untucked from the sock. It's black and dappled with frost. Right. I don't know which direction my right foot is facing. I know the knee is facing the wrong way, though. On account of the great grey slab that sits where it ought to be.
Yes, frightful shame, that.
He moves at last and I see him. Tinted goggles, more like spectacles in a frame, sit above a well-groomed moustache. There are little icicles forming on its slender tips. His clothes look to be made from some sort of skin. Walrus, probably. And the fur that sits around his neck is polar bear, I'd guess. It's hard to tell, because he doesn't seem to be in colour. Have I gone mad? I posit the question, even though I'm pretty certain I know the answer. Hypothermia, blood loss, oxygen deprivation, shock, early stages of sepsis, and if nothing else, a shattered kneecap and breaks in every bone from my thigh down on the right side. I shift to try and turn, but the pack is still lodged under my shoulders. It's not letting me go anywhere.
Mad? Oh, possibly. Happens to a lot of chaps up here, you see. Mountain madness and all of that. It's the dashed cold, you see. Addles the mind. He stares at the east, where I see the first glint of morning light. I made it through the night, which is good. Not sure what to do now, though. Am I gonna die? I don't know why I'm asking. I know the answer. Maybe I think this fucking hallucination is gonna lie to me. Comfort me. Yes, I'm rather afraid you will. He nods, sending little snowflakes drifting off of him. I suppose it's up to you how you die, though. His eyes dance across the tomb I've made for myself. The stone is so heavy. The wide angle has destroyed my leg. I don't even know for certain I'm awake right now. Maybe I'm already dead. You're dashed close to the top, you know. Marvellous view up there. Shame to miss it. He reminds me of Mum. In a way. Same moustache. I laugh and a soft trickle of something warm comes out of my mouth. I know what it is. I also know what what I am suggesting. I can make the top, maybe. I definitely can't make the bottom. Can you see my pit? I ask him. I ask me. I'm not sure which is which anymore. He guides my hand, or I reach blindly into the snow, but it closes around titanium. I lift the 300 quid piece of shite that put me here, that found its way into a crack and let me pull it wide. I know what I need to do. I just don't know that I can actually do it. Can you help me? I beg him. He places his hand on my shoulder. I can't feel it. I can't feel anything. Just my skin splitting from the chill. My lips feel like cornflakes. Fuck. He shakes his head, which I know is true. He's just in my brain. My frozen, dying brain. The thunk as I begin to work away at my hip joint is less meaty than expected. I don't know much about sound or how it carries, but I know my screams went a long way. Maybe some other campers hear me pre-dawn and I'm the phantom in their climbing story. I'm surprised by the struggle of it. The bones come apart easy, but getting the meat to separate is hard. So tired. I just want to sleep. But I'm going to see the top. My friend is singing to me now, like he's trying to cut through the screams. We'll meet again. Don't know where. Don't know when. Mum used to sing that, didn't she? She sung it at the school gate when I was little. When I went off to uni. That last day in the hospital. I'm crying now. The tears freeze on my cheeks, like little salty scabs. By the time I'm free, the sun is mostly up, and I begin my climb.
My drag. I'm not sure what's driving me, but I have to see the view. I have to prove I can do this. I'm not going to be ripped off of this world early by some stupid fucking disease. Some... I must have fallen asleep for a bit. My friend's gone now. I can't see the top. I can just see snow and blood. I wish someone else would come for me. I'd even take having him back. That man. He was so familiar. He was behind glass. Photograph. Yeah. That was it. I cough what must be the last of my blood up. There's no way there's any left in me. When she died, I was sure I was empty too. I was sure no one was there. No one understood me. No one could feel what I felt. I was a selfish asshole. So many people tried to save me from my hubris, from self-destruction, and I pushed them away. This is my making. And I know that I was wrong before. But now so far from the ground. The air so thin. And the light of day washing over my pallid form. And I'm alone. I'll see you soon, Mum.
What a stunning performance, Nick, of a really gripping story.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. Wow, I love the. You really sounded cold when you started out. The way you did your voice is brilliant.
I genuinely feel colder for having done it. It's a really odd psychological
But
effect.
you do.
But I feel cold.
Yeah. Well, you sounded cold. You really did. Yeah.
He did, yeah, definitely.
That was brilliant. But as the story went on, you sounded less cold, which I think is appropriate because you'd be kind of getting numb, and you were just you're drifting off from your senses. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, that's great. No, that was very vivid.
There were so many good lines in there, but really good dollop of body horror in there. The descriptions of like the bone being easy enough to break, but the meat being the troublesome part. Was really it was really strong, and I really liked the description of you have to remind me of the exact wording, but when he first looks down and he says that the snow around him is pink for
a surprising amount of time.
a surprising distance. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I was there. Like as soon as you said that, I was really fully there, and I could totally see the scene, and it was really well described.
It was very vivid, and it sounds to me, Nico, that you know a bit about climbing. Yeah, you?
I've done the stairs.
No.
Have you ever been climbing, Nick?
I have never climbed anything in my
Oh,
entire
right.
life.
Well, that's impressive then, because I think it was the bit when he he said he'd got his pick, and he said use this piece of shit, 300 pound
the 300 pounds titanium piece of shit.
You managed to get into a crack, and then it just bent. I don't know. It sounded just like very authentic to me, so that was good. It's those kind of, but I guess that's writing, isn't it? You just whack in a few details, and that's all you need to make to allow the reader to buy into the idea that you really know what you're talking about. Yeah, which is
so that line ended up in there because I thought they were called climbing picks, and I thought that doesn't sound right, so I'll Google them. And the first thing that came up when I Googled them was shop listings for them. And my reaction, 300, Jesus! So I had to put it in the story because I would be genuinely furious if I'd paid that much for something and it
failed,
and it broke.
Oh, that wasn't in one of the reviews by any chance, was it?
Oh, I didn't look.
You should definitely post this as an Amazon review of a climbing pick.
Yeah. Bloody thing!
So
it bent, and I ended up having to amputate my own leg.
Now I'm dead. 1 star.
Yeah.
No, no, that was good. You made me think you really had obviously not been in that situation, but you knew something about climbing. That's good. Yeah.
The emotional connection to the mum as well was really strong. I felt like the bit that really made that one for me. I mean, it was all good, but in terms of the relationship with the mother, the bit where he laughs about the southern hallucination bloke having the same mustache.
Yeah.
That was a really well observed bit of northern humour, I think.
I know too many of you. Well, thank you. You guys have been really complimentary there. I think
That was really good. Yeah, yeah.
playing to my strengths, isn't it, to write a very performative piece.
But I do think that the actual writing's very strong, and we're season 2 now, and we've seen both of us do lots of different stories over the course of the first season, and that one felt really different and new, and really, really well done. So, congrats!
Well, thank you.
Yeah, the catch on the story and the performance as well. I thought the performance was really good as well. So that was
very kind of you. But so, speaking of mini stories, I think we're making the same segue here, Ben.
I think we were. Go on, you do the segue.
I was going to say, this is the part where we stop talking about stories and we start talking about the Chris Beckett, man, myth, legend.
Yeah, it's actually an extremely common name, actually, the Chris Beckett. Loads of the Chris Becketts in the world.
But at least one has been famously killed, so I think you need to be careful of that.
Well, that's Thomas.
That was Thomas Beckett. Oh, that's me.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, but
you were so strong on the history stuff when it was the Caesars.
Yeah, I know. It's all slipped away now.
Yeah. But yeah, no relation as far as I know. Yeah.
So we've got some questions, the most of which we've asked every guest we've had so far. So I'm really interested to see what your responses are to it.
Okay. Yeah,
the first is nice and simple. What are you reading at the moment?
Let's see. Actually, I'm reading a non-fiction book called Entangled Life, which is about fungi, which is really interesting. In fact, the way fungi, fungi are incredible. They're like they function like enormous brains spread out over hundreds of meters underground. All kind of stuff. Anyway, that's I'm reading at the moment. But that's so I actually currently read a lot of non-fiction and not so much fiction. But I also just read a book by just the previous book I read was by Bernardine Evaristo. Not the Booker Prize winning book, but another one called Mr. Loverman, which I thought was very good. I thought it slightly tailed off towards the end, I thought, but the rest of it I thought was really, really good. And enjoyed it very much.
Sounds good. Entangled Life sounds fascinating. This was it called Entangled?
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So, but it's just about fungi. I mean, fungi are they're not animals, they're not plants, they're a different life form entirely, and what they can do is incredible. I mean, they for example, fungi they do deals with plants. They provide plants with certain trace elements in exchange for sugar, which plants get by photosynthesizing. And fungi will actually do deals on the different exchange rate depending on the availability of trace elements. So
that's mad. That's so
cool. And they will also move. It's not. They're thought to move trace elements from areas where they're common to areas where they're scarce in order to be able to get a better deal from plants.
The fungi stock market in action.
Yes, sort of underground capitalism in action. Yeah, so wow. It is really interesting. Fungi also communicate electrically underground and pass signals. Back anyway. It's really interesting.
Sounds great.
Yeah. You'll find some of it'll find its way into a book at some point.
It definitely sounds like it. I can already kind of hear the cogs whirring there. I think that sounds.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's one reason why I read a lot of non-fiction, because I kind of feel, I want to draw on stuff, about the actual world to create my fictional worlds. So that's part of the thing. Rather than just drawing on other people's fictional worlds,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're I know you don't just write science fiction, because I haven't actually read it yet, but I have just received delivery of your new book, Two Tribes.
Oh yeah.
But I'm aware that's sort of more naturalistic in a way, isn't it? Is my understanding it's sort of based around.
Well, it has a science fictional framing device, in the sense that the narrator of the story is a historian 250 years in the future, looking back on our present time. So
Cool.
there's a framing story involving that narrator and her friend.
Yeah,
but the main story is set in late 2016, early 2017, in
it's
East
definitely a
Anglia.
really good idea to considering how much science fiction you do write, that to base all that on real stuff. As I think, as you even mentioned to Nick just moments ago with the climbing pick, like the inclusion of little details or even big details that are genuine or sound genuine is really important for earning a reader's trust, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think it's a mysterious thing that goes on, because you said to Nick there, and I agree with you. You had a really strong picture of the scene he was describing, and yet if we were to analyze it, we would realize he hadn't told us all that much about the scene. So, and that's not a criticism of you, Nick. It's just the way it is,
Don't
and
tell him.
yeah, and the truth is, the reader does most of the work, and our job is to give the reader permission to imagine it's real. So you just have to throw in these odd detail. That's the mysterious thing about it. Nobody ever describes a scene in great detail, really.
No.
And if they do, you don't follow the instructions. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's like, for example, Dickens. He'll have a character and he'll describe the character's face in great detail. The shape of their nose, etc., etc. But do you remember all that when you carry on reading? No, you don't. What you do remember is a sense that this character the writer could really see this character, and that gives you permission to imagine it for yourself, I think. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
that's my theory. Yeah,
well
that's my theory. Yeah.
I always find this next question, Chris, to be really difficult.
Okay, great. Okay, I prepare myself.
Okay. What would you say is the best book you've ever read?
Oh, that is really quite an impossible question, isn't it?
I told you, it's deeply unfair.
I could tell you a few very good books I've read, but I'm not sure to say the best book I've ever read. I don't think that's doable, really. But do you want me to do that, or do you want me to just say one at random?
Whichever book was like the first one that came to your head. Like, so if there were a few that came to your mind, whatever the first one was.
Okay, well, the one that came into my head is a book called The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro. Have you ever read it?
I've not read that one. I have read something else by Kazuo Ishiguro, I think, but
this is a bit different from all his other books.
Right.
It's much longer than his other books. And I certainly for a while would say that was my favorite book after I'd read it, and it certainly remains one of my favorite books. But I think I could probably think of at least a dozen books I like as much as it. But that's still I still think it's a very good book.
Why that book in particular?
Well, it's a very fat novel. By his standards, anyway. It's not particularly fat by the standards of science fiction novels, but it's quite fat by the standards of kind of ordinary, literary novels. And I was very intrigued when I heard him talking about it on the radio. He said what he tried to do in this book is to use narrative devices of dreams. So he wasn't supposed to be a dream, and it wasn't about dreams, but he wanted to use the kind of narrative devices that dreams use. So, for example, in a dream, it's not unusual, is it, in a dream for one individual to represent two different people? Someone's your mother, but it's also your aunt. Oh, well, actually, that wouldn't be very imaginative, would it? Someone's your mother, and it's also, your best friend or something. Well, a bit like Nick's story. Someone's a posh Englishman with a moustache, but it's also his mum. That's the sort of thing that happens quite literally in dreams. And or it's also not particularly unusual in a dream to go through a door and you're in a completely different place.
Yeah.
You walk into a door in Cambridge, you walk out the other side of the door and you're in the Antarctic. That kind of thing. And the whole novel is just built using those dream type narrative devices to tell the story. But the story is really about a concert pianist who's arrived in this town and he's going to give a concert. He's quite full of himself, and he's quite famous, and everyone in the town is making a fuss of him. But the whole thing is also like a dream. I mean, it's like an anxiety dream, and it's like one of those dreams where you're trying to get somewhere, and somehow you can never get there. And the whole novel, this entire novel, is takes the form of an anxiety dream, where he's somehow or other he never quite gets to where he wants to get to.
It sounds brilliant. It sounds really.
It is actually. It is actually really good, and it's not. Ishiguro's novels aren't normally like that. They're normally more, much more naturalistic than that. So it was a bit of a one-off. And at the time, a lot of critics really hated it, and I thought they were really. And I think they may have put Ishiguro off from trying to do more experiments like that. But I thought it was wonderful. Yeah. So that's one of my favourite books. Another one I quite often mention a Philip Dick novel, but it varies which novel of his novels I mention. So that's more difficult to pick one. But
he certainly wrote some corkers.
Yeah, Corcus. He wrote an awful lot of novels, and a lot of them as a good core of a good dozen that are really good novels. I could go on. I could go on, but that's cheating. Sure. I'm cheating.
My understanding about Philip K. Dick is that he wrote some of those novels like a couple of days before the deadline, using loads of uppers to make sure that he didn't sleep.
He did, yeah. He took a lot of amphetamines, and some of the novels you can tell they're rather rushed. You can tell that. But when he writes well, when he does give time to think about his writing is very good, and he has an incredible. I think what I think I'm looking for in a great novel is a very distinctive vision. So that you're immediately in the. The Philip Dick's world is completely different from anyone else's fictional world. It's got its very own unique character. It's simultaneously funny and scary, and simultaneously human and ordinary and existentially terrifying. It's a weird combination, and I think I'm a big fan of his. But Doris Lessing used to be a very famous, great. I haven't read any of her stuff for years. But when I started out, big influence on me, particularly her more weirder novels. So her more weirder novels is. You can tell I'm a writer. My really good use of English. Yeah.
I was actually going to mention, so I did just before we came on. I thought I'll just check Chris's website to see what you put in his about section, and you actually said something really nice about naturalistic fiction. Just going back to the Kazuo Ishiguro book that you've gone for there, and you mentioned that it's in your about section. You say naturalistic fiction is a relatively modern invention, a very specialist subgenre of fantasy, which, although it really is made up, nevertheless mimics real life. And
yes.
So that sounds like that's where Kazuo goes from doing the mimicking of real life and sort of blends back across that border away towards fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could argue that dreams are the prototypical form of fiction, because they're the one form of storytelling that everybody does.
Very cool.
I'm
definitely going to be reading that book.
Everybody, when they go to sleep, they tell them. So even people who claim they couldn't possibly make up a story do it. But yeah, I'm always. I think the reason I wrote that on my website, I'm always a little bit defensive about the notion that naturalist, realist fiction is the mainstream, and things like science fiction or fantasy or whatever are on the fringes, because I think if you look historically, the opposite is true. I think historically the opposite is true. If you look at the stories that people told in pre-modern times, they'd be mostly fantastical stories in one way or another.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Do you have a favourite literary character?
Oh dear, my mind's gone blank. I'll tell you what, ask me the next one and then come back to that one. I think that's the best thing. That's the best thing. See if I can come up with something in the interim. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this one's a bit more. This is certainly within your wheelhouse. What is your actual process of writing? What's your writing process?
Well, I don't think I've got a very good writing process. I think my wife would bear witness to the fact that my writing process consists of a good many months of doing sod all and getting very grumpy and thinking, I'm really crap at this and I have no idea how to do it. And writing a lot of stuff which is really awful. And then eventually something clicks and I figure out a way of, obviously during this long period of crapness, I have some vague idea of something I want to write about, so it's not, but it's just like any attempt to write it turns out completely wooden and dead, and eventually I find something shifts, like, I don't know, I might decide I've been slogging away trying to write it in the third person, and I suddenly think, do you know what, I'll try and write it in the first person, and that works, or something like that, or it might be, I'm going to give it in the case of one of my recent books, Beneath the World, the Sea, that had a particularly long period of months of crapness, and it was originally going to be a fairly conventional science fictional setting on an alien planet, and there was going to be humans, and every attempt to make that scenario come to life came to nothing. And then I thought, oh sod it, I'm bored of setting things. I'm bored of alien planets. I'm bored of setting things in the future. I'm going to set it in the recent past, in somewhere on Earth, and the reader's just going to have to deal with the fact that there's a very alien place on Earth. Once I had that idea, it was tremendously liberating, and I was able to write the novel quite quickly from that point onwards. But so, in answer to my writing process, there is quite a long period of faffing around until I can find my way in, and then once I find my way in, it's a different story. I start to enjoy the process and I start to write, but I still don't have still don't have a very clear plan. I start to write and feel my way forward, and after a while it sort of gradually comes together. But it's a very, in my case, it's a very unconscious and intuitive process for a lot of it, really. So I mean, there's a lot. The conscious process is building up a great pile of things that I think are going to be in it. Ideas mainly. And then the unconscious process is the kind of turning all that into digesting all that and then actually digesting is not a very good analogy, because really the only word,
you saw where that was going, didn't you?
the only word I can now use is regurgitate, which isn't a very nice word. But I can
like gestation metamorphosis thing, isn't it? You
I kind of missed
the chrysalis.
That's right. That's a much better one. Thank you. That's more That's more palatable. Yeah. I eventually, I faff around for ages like a caterpillar, and eventually I get in the chrysalis, and out comes hopefully a beautiful butterfly.
I have actually read your book about that. You ate through one slice of salami and then some cheese.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. One of my works.
I think that hungry caterpillar's lawyer is already putting together the.
That
guy. Lawyer also made of lovely paper cutouts. Is that?
Yeah. Whoever wrote that book, I can't remember. He must probably made more money from that book than I've made from all the books I've written to get put together, I should think. Yeah.
I know we've got at least a few people that are fans of the podcast that are aspiring writers. So I think to hear that there's an initial sort of idea, and then as you say, like a chunk of time where you're really struggling with it, and then just working at it until.
Well, yes, I think that's semi-reassuring and semi-not reassuring, in the sense that what I'm also saying is it doesn't really get any easier, but so that's the downside of what I'm saying. But I think there is that general advice to writers, or not advice actually, it's just because it's not really something you can consciously do. You have to find your own voice, don't you? And I think what I'm saying is I find I have to go through that process each time. I have to find my own voice for each book. It's not just a case of having once found it, it's there and I'm okay. I've got to rediscover it each time. And
I think that's a really interesting insight.
And the other thing I say about my writing process is I don't write from an outline. What I do tend to do is I write, a few thousand words, and then I work over it, and then I write a few more thousand words. Then I work over everything I've done again. And so I proceed in rather a slow, cyclical way, working through everything I've done And that's how I gradually build a sense of a coherent voice, is I think by working over it. And it's not how a lot of people write. A lot of people write a first draft very quickly and then work back over the whole thing. I don't do that. I always go over what I've done over and over again before moving on to the next bit. So that's my particular technique. The one thing about that is you've got to be careful, is it means, of course, the last part of the book hasn't been gone over as much as the first part. So you then have to make sure when you've finished it to make sure you give the last part of quite a few extra runs and polishes, to make sure it doesn't look a bit less well worked than the first part. But that's my technique. But it's different from other people. I know. I don't know anyone else that does it quite like that.
I'm going to use this to fire into the next one. Other than a first draft of something that you absolutely despised, when was the last time that you cried reading?
I feel like you're making me a real hard bastard because I can't think of a single time I cried reading that.
A lot of people don't, I think.
We'll have a wonderful clickbait title for this. Chris Beckett hates books.
Yeah. It's funny because tears come to my eyes quite easily when I'm watching films, but they don't so often come to my eyes when I'm reading books. I think films, there's something a bit more immediate about it.
I mean, feel free to pose a film here if you'd. We've allowed like guests in the past and stuff to talk about like comic books and.
The last time I can remember, tears came to my eyes at the end of, and it was a bit cheesy actually at the end. But I was on the recommendation of my son-in-law. I watched the oh god, what's it called? That German time traveling series, Dark. Have you seen it?
I actually haven't seen that. No.
No, not here either.
It's a German Netflix series, and the premise of it is that in this small German town, there is a place where if you go, a sort of cave, and you go through it, you find yourself going back 33 years into the past, or 30, you're going back to a different time, and it's kind of, it's sort of not entirely different territory from your story, obviously, Ben. What happens is people keep going back and trying to change the future to stop bad things happening in the future, and they always make new bad things happen. So this town is stuck in this awful cycle of this group of 4 or 5 families who are kind of obsessed with this, and that there's also people who've actually gone back in time and made a life in a different time period and things like that. So it's very complicated, and it is dark, and towards the end of the final scene in the series, there's 2 characters who become very dominant in the course of the series, and they make a kind of sacrifice in the final scene, which I found moving, and that did bring tears to my eyes. Yeah, that was the last time I can recall tears to my eyes. I recommend it as a series. It is quite a commitment to watch it, because I think it's either 3 or 4 series, and it's quite slow going, but I was quite impressed. I'm glad my son-in-law got me into it. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of the sort of big golden age TV, long form series and stuff that have been coming out over the last sort of like 15 years.
I mean, those are more like novels, aren't they, than films are. Films are really more like short stories. TV series is more like a novel, so it's a bit more.
The one that everyone sort of credits with the start of it is, of course, The Sopranos, isn't it? And
Sopranos,
I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking that so many other actors play they play iconic roles in movies and that kind of thing, but really their on-screen time is max. It really maxes out around 3 hours, possibly if it's a series, it may be a few more. But for the guy that played the main character of that, so the guy that played Tony Soprano, James Gandolfini, he had hundreds of hours on screen as this character at a really high level, and it does change the way that you absorb the story for sure.
It does, yeah.
In a way,
Breaking Bad was another one, wasn't it? Yeah, go on, yeah.
I was just going to say it supports the there's kind of a performance dichotomy, which is Brechtian on one side. So, you pick up the hat, you put on the hat, you're the character.
Yeah,
And that's very cinema. They're all such famous people that you say, that's Scarlett Johansson, but actually right now it's not. She's this person and we can pretend that for 2 hours.
yeah.
Whereas long form cinema has the Stanislavski thing of being like a lot of the time that lesser known actors, not so much now, you're getting lots and lots of people who are big in cinema heading to TV, but this really long burn of every scene has a preceding scene and will have a following scene, and it means that nothing exists in a void, and it produces a very different kind of acting because of that.
Yeah. And it is more novel-like, isn't it? Don't you think? Because there's so much more detail and so much more. The reader's so much more immersed in it. One of my I was struck with one of my novels, Dark Eden, when I noticed when you see the audio version on Amazon, it tells you how many hours it is, and I suppose shouldn't have been surprised, but I was slightly surprised to realize that it took 13 hours to read it aloud,
Yeah.
So that is the length of a season and a half of a series, isn't it, really? And
That's a good point. Yeah.
season and a half of a TV series, and it makes you realize why, when they turn a novel into a conventional film, let's go back to your point, Nick, you turn it into a novel into a conventional film, so much has to be taken out of it, doesn't it? Because they have to cram what basically say 13 hours worth of stuff into an hour and a half.
Of course, there is the fairly famous example of the inverse of that, where the Hobbit, the short children's book, was turned into 3 really long movies.
Oh God, yeah.
But even that, they ended up leaving some stuff out. It's just sort of they added
Only
in
the
a load
good
of
bits, though.
Yeah, they only left out the good bits and added in nonsense scenes.
I went to see one of those and I thought, God, I'm not going to be bothered with this. It's just silly, But yeah, they'd added a lot of nonsense.
So we've got a few more questions here, which would be nice to get your answers to. If you could adapt a book into another medium, what would it be and why? So we're talking about long form TV and cinema and stuff. Like, is there anything that
a book? Are you talking about someone else's book? Yeah,
well, possibly, or in this case, feel free to use yours and like.
Well, no, I won't do mine. I won't think of mine. Let me think. I do sometimes think Philip Dick's novel "To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep" was, of course, famously adapted as Blade Runner.
Yes,
I would love, and Blade Runner has its, it's a very, very widely admired film and has many merits, but it isn't really very like the original novel at all, except in the sort of props department, the sort of dark setting and decaying city and so forth. The actual story and the mood and so on, it's very different. And I would really like to see a film made of "To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep" that was really faithful to the original novel, or more faithful to the mood of the original novel. I mean, for example, one thing about the original novel is that it's in places extremely funny. In fact, the first few pages of that novel, it's laugh out loud funny. So
you're actually totally right about that. I remember laughing in the first few pages because it's when he's dealing with his wife and the mood regulator machine, isn't it?
Mood regulator. I mean, it's just like, it's almost sort of, it's just like joke after joke, and then it kind of gets into this strange world, But it's and there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in the novel that isn't going on in the film. The strange obsession, the main character's obsession with Rick Deckard's obsession with with animals. Wanted to buy a real animal and so on, and the way he spends time hanging out outside pet shops, looking in the windows and thumbing through his catalogue of pets and so on, dreaming about owning a real giraffe or whatever it is he wants to. It's like, no, not giraffe. Something probably more modest. All this stuff is much weirder and much stranger and much less. I want to say po-faced than Blade Runner.
Is there
And
someone you'd want to helm that, like in your mind's eye, a director?
Who would do that? I don't think I'm familiar enough with different directors to know who the right person to do that would be. But it would be, someone with a sense of humour, someone who enjoys.
Sounds like a Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi, yes.
Yeah,
that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Get some New Zealand humour in there with it.
Oh right, yes, I know who you mean. The guy that did what's it called?
What We Do in the Shadows was the good one. The sort of jokey comedy TV show about vampires. That's
I didn't see that one. Did he? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I didn't see that one, but yeah, I think I know the guy you mean. But yeah, that would be great. Yeah. It should be funny, but at the same time, it's the original novel is every bit as dark as Blade Runner, but just but. And also the characters are more human. They're much more human than Blade Runner characters.
I remember there's a bit in that book where he I think it's when he sort of semi-accidentally kills someone as he's sort of reaching for his gun tube in his car. And I remember that being a big. It's not like he's not, as you say, po-faced. He sort of like doesn't like say a line after he's done it or anything like that. He's like really shaken up by the fact that he's been in a fight and.
They have kind of human feelings, or if they don't, or sometimes in that case, he sometimes doesn't have feelings and worries. Does that mean I'm not really human and that kind of thing, and which I don't know. I think we've all been there, haven't we? We've all sometimes thought, Jesus, I should really be feeling something, but I'm not feeling something. What does that say about me?
I'm gonna leap in. I think with my favorite question, not just for this podcast, but ever to ask someone. And I insisted on us using it through season 1, and we shall continue to do so because it amuses me.
Yeah.
Chris, can you tell me one really disinteresting fact about you or your life?
A really uninteresting fact about me?
Yeah. It's completely inconsequential, uninteresting.
I have downward curving fingernails, which I was once told might be a symptom of heart disease, but it turned out they weren't.
When you say downward curving, do you mean that they hook towards the palm like a talon?
No, not that. Well, I suppose they do very, very slightly. I mean, if you look at your fingernails sideways on, yours probably more or less, the surface of them is probably more or less flat, but mine are slightly convex.
Oh, I see what you mean. So they're sort of right. So there's like they come to a sort of raised bit.
You wouldn't notice it, but a doctor once looked at it and said, "Oh, that can be a sign of heart disease." And I spent a better part of a day having tests done on me in a hospital, listening, and then eventually it was actually the a sign of heart disease. So that's a fairly boring fact, I would have thought.
I like it, and also, if any of our listeners have that, maybe you need to go and get yourself checked out. So.
Well, are your fingernails bulging?
Yeah,
that may be an early sign of heart disease.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That's a really good answer. I like that.
It was a good one. It was informative.
Informative and yet deeply dull.
Yeah. This has been the most educational episode by a country mile, I got to tell
you. So Nick gets to ask his question that he's been dying to ask you. Obviously, I would also like to really ask you a question about your work, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you won the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is a very prestigious award, and congratulations. I know it was a while ago, but it's a really big deal. What was that like? Is basically my question. Like, did that blow your socks off? Was it?
It certainly did. It wasn't the first prize I won, actually. The first prize I won was the Edge Hill Prize a couple of years before that, which is a prize for short story collections.
In fact, you got that for the Turing test, right?
I got that for the Turing test. So, So possibly that was the most explosively weird experience, because it was like completely out of the blue. I mean, the Turing Test was published by a small press. Oh, no, and when I say small press, I mean a guy who lives in Norwich. That's that was the press. And he had I expect I suppose he expected to. He was lucky sell a couple of hundred copies. And he sent this book off to into the Book Enterprise, and I'd forgotten he'd even done it. And then suddenly I was on the shortlist, and the next thing was, I'd won it against some quite big names. So that was a huge experience for me, quite overwhelming. And then that also sort of helped me sort of move into a sort of more of a professional sort of being professionally published. So that was a huge one. But then the Clarke Award, of course, is another very huge one. And again, obviously, I don't want you to think that, well, I just expected to win it or anything like that. I didn't. I was amazed when I was on the shortlist, and I didn't really expect to get past the shortlist. And it's a funny feeling when, in both cases, when you hear the judge start to say, the judges always say, well, it was a very difficult decision, and all the books are very good, and they talk their way, and then they start describing. But the one that won, we liked in particular because, and they start describing it, you think, wait a minute, oh yeah, that's definitely my book they're talking about, and it's such a kind of wonderful experience. And when I won it, the guy who was at the time head of the imprint that published Dark Eden, he said beforehand, doesn't really matter whether you win or not, Chris. The main thing is you made the shortlist. That's what's great. So, don't worry about winning. And then as soon as I won, he leaned towards he leaned towards me and he said, "You know what I said about it doesn't really matter if you win. That was crap. Actually the thing to do is win. So, so yeah.
Now that you've got it,
Yeah, now you've got it. I can tell you.
Yeah,
I tell you that we would have been deeply. Yeah. Anyway, that was quite a strange experience, and I had to sort of make
crazy
a speech, and you have to have a speech ready just in case, of course.
Yeah, give a speech. Wow. I mean, not to sort of harp on about it, but it is a massive award, isn't it? Like, so it's been won by people like China Miéville, Margaret Atwood, Mary Doria Russell, like some real some amazing authors.
It's a massive honour to win it, and
I did go back and have a look at other authors that haven't won it, Chris.
Yeah.
And but they made the shortlist, so you're a step above, and that includes Ian M. Banks, Stanislaw Lem, Kazuo Ishiguro that we mentioned earlier, and William Gibson, the sort of like granddaddy of cyberpunk.
Yeah, I mean,
so this is it.
So it's a really big deal.
What we're saying is, what the hell are you doing here?
Yeah. I was blown away by your agreement to come on the podcast.
Yeah, well, well, when you're start adding writing, you imagine that when you just long to get something published, and you imagine when you get something published, everything will be different. And of course, it isn't quite like that. You get something published, and then, oh, that's very nice, but then it's on to the next thing, and it is the same thing with prizes. It's lovely, of course it is, but you still got to think of the next thing to write and so forth and so on. But of course, it's a lovely moment, and you have much too much to drink, and everyone wants to talk to you and all this sort of thing, and it feels great. It feels slightly like a bubble that's going to burst at some point, but it feels great at the time, and it was lovely.
I think that's wonderful and well deserved. It's a damn good book.
Thank you.
But that does lead us into the to one of our final ones. We sort of touched on it a little bit. Have you got anything upcoming that people can look forward to?
Well, I have actually. I wrote during the first lockdown. I've got a book coming out that's called Tomorrow, and the history of this was after a lengthy period of, I've told you about my many months periods of faffing around and writing very little, and what I do write is crap. And anyway, during the first lockdown in February, I said to my wife one evening, or March, I suppose it would have been. I said to my wife one evening, you know, I've done enough faffing around. Tomorrow I'm going to sit down and start my novel. And my wife said to me, "Do you know what? That would actually be rather a good opening line." And and my wife is very wise about these things. And I sat down the next day and I wrote that opening line. And I wrote this whole novel in about 6 weeks, you know, and which is very, very fast by my standards. Starting with that line without a clear plan. And the word of the novel is tomorrow, and it also finishes with the word tomorrow, so I called it Tomorrow. And it's not a science fiction novel as such. It's a bit weird. It's not a realist novel exactly. And part of it is about the process of writing. It's set in an imaginary country. It jumps back and forward in time, jumps back and forward over the space of the narrator's life. And it's certainly quite different from anything I've done before. So I'm hoping people like it. It's got a beautiful cover. It's worth having it just to have the cover. You could put it on your mantelpiece.
I always imagine that's a lovely bit about being an author is seeing like if you get a nice cover, like being proud of that, because there are some bad book covers out there.
Yeah.
But if you get a nice one that you're proud of, you can be like, yeah,
it is nice. All my books that have been published by Corvus have all had their covers. They're all designed by the same guy. All the current covers, you know, they have had different covers. They change them over time. But were designed by the same guy, and I really like what he does. He always reads the book very carefully, and he's always open for suggestions as well. So if I say to him, "I'm not quite sure about that bit," he'll change it. He's got no problems. And if you look at it on Amazon, you'll see Tomorrow's got a lovely cover. Yeah, and I think covers are really important in the book. I think a cover, you know, you look at the cover of the book and then you open the book and start to read. That cover is in your mind, and it colors the way you read the book, I think. And so they're really important. But hopefully the content is good as well.
I would agree with that, but I would also say that I am the kind of person that immediately strips the dust jacket off a hardback.
Oh, really?
In order to read it. Yeah, I don't like the way that it sort of sits in my hand when it's got a dust jacket.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't. Well, to be truthful, I don't really like hardbacks at all. I like.
They're not nice to read, are they? Really?
They're not nice to read, and a paperback is basically a much nicer object. It's this nice chunky little thing, you know, and then they stack up neatly in a nice pile. You know, I like paperbacks much more than hardbacks.
Yeah, I agree.
Is Tomorrow available now? Which is a weird.
It won't be coming out till the summer, but they designed the cover ridiculously early. And well, I don't say ridiculous. That's about ungrateful to say ridiculously. Well, I mean, you know, they're surprisingly early is what I meant to say. You know, so it already has a cover, and you can already see the cover on Amazon. If you want to pre-order,
you'd barely finished the book before they'd done it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thinking of writing a book, they said we have the cover.
Yeah, we had the perfect cover. Yeah, actually, that wouldn't be, you know, it'd be a bit like your you know, your short story. We have a theme. You could just say, okay, here's a selection of covers. Pick the cover and write a book to go with it. That wouldn't be a bad way of writing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Wouldn't be a bad way of writing a book. Yeah. But save them a lot of, you know, design expenses. You know, just have a standard set of covers. But yeah, so that's my next book. Yeah, and I'm trying to start another one now. But that's my next one to come out. Yeah.
I'll be pre-ordering it. So finally, it's just I don't know whether you're going for this sort of thing, but if people were to try and find you on social media and that kind of thing, what's the best way for them to like follow you and know what's coming out next?
Well, I'm on Twitter, so it's at Chris Z Beckett. My middle initial isn't really begin with a Z. It's just that Chris Beckett is such a common name.
Yeah.
Z. Chris Z Beckett, and that's my Twitter account. And checking out, I said that right, at Chris Z Beckett. That's right, Beckett with 2 T's. And I have a website, chris-beckett.com.
Amazing. Well, we will tweet out tomorrow on the day. We should do it the day before. That seems the most sensible for that book.
Okay, brilliant.
So we'll say tomorrow is tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Other than that, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the podcast, Chris.
Yeah, real pleasure to meet you, and nice to talk to you again, Ben. Yeah, so yeah, all the best to both of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your stories. I thought they were both great. Really enjoyed them.
Yours was
Oh, thank you.
marvelous too.
Yes, yours was as well.
Really, really great. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your chosen service so that you don't miss out on future episodes.
You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, where you can talk to us directly and even suggest prompts for upcoming stories.
If you're not a tweeter, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Just search for The Tiny Bookcase.
Now, if you want to support the podcast,
and we'd really appreciate it if you did,
you can do so at patreon.com/The Tiny Bookcase.
And then you could be just as special as these story seekers.
Should we thank them?
I think so.
Well, then it's a huge thank you to the legendary Matthew McLaren and the absolutely epic Scott Byrne
for their support.
Thank you for listening. Catch you next week.
Next week. Make it slimy.
Make it slimy, Nick.